Anyway, all right. Well, I would like to welcome everyone today. This is a brand new presentation that we're doing here at Wildlife for You. Um, it is titled Sly as a Fox, and I'm going to be the presenter. My name is Daryl Radijak. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I kind of specialize in carnivores. And believe it or not, we are putting this presentation on because we actually listen to your input. A couple of times throughout the year, we asked for ideas and suggestions, and a number of you wanted to learn more about foxes. They're one of those animals that we know we have all around us, but oftentimes we don't know much about them. And so, like I was saying in the preamble here, it's critical that we learn and know as much as we can about wildlife, so we learn how to live with them, and we don't impact them, and they don't impact us. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to talk about foxes and answer questions and be here as long as you want. So again, sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation, Sly as a Fox. And just so you know, the thunder is clapping outside my window, so hopefully we won't lose connection. So I do this all the time, but again, I've got to make sure everyone understands who is giving you the information about wildlife. Again, my name's Daryl Radijak, and just to let you know, I do have quite a bit of experience working with wildlife. I am a lifelong lover of wildlife. Ever since I was a little boy, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I do have a special passion for bears, but one of the things that qualifies me to be able to talk to people and try to educate people on wildlife is I did receive my degree in wildlife management from the State University of New York, College of Environmental Science and Forestry. If you've never heard of it, it is part of the Syracuse University campus. It's on their campus. Wonderful, wonderful school, not just for wildlife, but for forestry as well. Anyway, after I received my degree, I did start my career in the mid to late 1990s. One of the first jobs in my field was working for the Appalachian Bear Center, which many of you know now as the Appalachian Bear Rescue. Still a wonderful organization. They're huge. They're doing wonderful. Many of you follow them on Facebook. I was actually their first full-time curator or manager of that facility, and I did that for just over 4 years. But after a while, I was told to get a real job because it was a wonderful job, but it just wasn't enough to support a family. And so I began working for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, which is the state wildlife agency for Tennessee. Many of you know that each and every state does have a wildlife agency to watch over all wildlife. But because of my experience with the Bear Center, I was soon promoted to this position called the Big Game Coordinator. Within that position, I was in charge of managing all the elk, all the deer, all the bears, all the wild hogs in the state of Tennessee. I did that for about 7 years. So I got lots and lots and lots of bear experience, as you can see. After a while, the director of the agency saw something in me, and he promoted me to the chief of wildlife and forestry for the state of Tennessee. Wonderful job, was over all wildlife, every critter in the state. And I did that for about 5 years. The bad part about that job is when you're up that high, you are no longer in the field. You're dressing in suits, which, if you know me, is not my forte, but you're talking to politicians and commissioners, and you're no longer doing what you love to do. So I made the leap. Always wanted to live and work out west, and here I am in northern New Mexico, which many of you know. But as you can see, I I'm a career wildlife biologist. I've got over 20 years experience working with animals, managing animals. And so hopefully the information that we present is really good, sound, science-based information. And this should be the leading stuff as far as what we need to do around wildlife in order to keep them safe and us safe. So with that, I'm going to jump right into Sly as a Fox. And what we're going to do to start things off is to begin talking about how many different fox species are there. Everyone knows generally what a fox looks like, but how many different species out there? And if you look worldwide, we have about 32 species of fox. Now, these are animals that when you picture what a fox looks like, these are all animals, these 32 species are all animals that you would envision to be fox-like. But here's the thing. There are what is called true foxes. And what I mean by true foxes, it's a category of animals that belong to one specific genus. And that genus is the genus Vulpes. And this is, you're not going to believe this, but the Latin word for fox is Vulpes. And so when you look at only the animals that belong to that genus Vulpes, the true fox genus, there's only 12 species worldwide. Those other 20 or so species are very fox-like creatures, but they could be like close to fox but have some type of other canid in them, whether or not it's coyote or anything else. And so if you have ever attended my other webinars, especially the timber wolves or the gray wolf webinar, whenever we're talking about canids, things begin to get really mucky. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of hybridization that occurs. If you recall your basic biology, literally a species is one species that can breed and reproduce with members of the same species and produce viable offspring. And so if you have two different species, technically they should not be able to produce viable offspring, meaning that the offspring that they have can then reproduce and produce more of that. And so for some reason or another, the canids are really, really crazy because there's a lot of hybridization. It could have been because there's a lot of movement. Obviously, there's domestication that occurs and a lot of movements of these animals, but sometimes it gets a little murky when we're talking about some of these canid species. So let's look at this genus Vulpes. This is, again, what we call a true fox. And so obviously this picture is one that right away everybody recognizes as a fox. It's a red fox to be exact. But this genus Vulpes, what qualifies something as being in this genus? Now, it's not hard and fast, but if you look at what characteristics belong to this genus, these animals are generally a little bit smaller than any of the other canid species, like coyotes and wolves and domestic dogs. And so they're generally a little bit smaller. Another big thing is if you look at their pelage or their fur, oftentimes the very tip of their tail is a different color. Whether or not it's a white tip for one species or a black tip for another species, generally in this genus Vulpes, the tip of their tail is its distinguishing feature. So that's a real cool thing to keep in mind, because if you are looking at an animal from the distance, or if you have, say, for example, a trail camera picture, and you can't decide whether or not it's a coyote or a fox, and you could see the tip of the tail pretty good, that could tip you off as to exactly what you have before you. And last but not least, and this is probably the most telltale thing regarding this species, is there's cranial differences. And literally what I mean by that is the shape and design of their skull really classifies them as true foxes. They have a very flat looking skull once it's all cleaned off. And so it's these groups of animals that are classified in this genus Vulpes, which is more or less called the true fox. So I will tell you, and I have not been the leading fox expert over the last number of weeks as I was putting this presentation together. I've learned quite a bit, and I will tell you without a doubt, some species of fox throughout the world are pretty darn cool. And I ended up reading a whole lot more about some of these other species, and I wanted to share some of that. So, for example, tell me this isn't one of the coolest looking creatures you've ever seen. It's also one of the smallest foxes, and this is a true fox. This is in the Vulpes genus. Does anyone know what kind of fox this is? This is where I'm looking for some engagement here. Melissa, you are spot on, and you're a pretty darn fast typer. Melissa's correct. This is what's called a Fennec Fox. Now, these are native to Africa, northern Africa. They're found throughout the Sahara Desert. So, literally, that northernmost part of Africa this is within the range of the Fennec Fox. And obviously, there's a distinguishing characteristic there with the ears. And here, whoops, that is, like I said, the Fennec Fox. Here's another really, really cool fox that I discovered on my research was this. And someone might know the answer to this. This one is really easy to guess. You could probably take a wild stab at it. But does anyone know what kind of fox this is? Again, this one is native to Africa, but instead of North Africa, it's mostly found in the southern part of the continent. Not vampire bat, but Lori, you are almost right on. It's actually called a bat-eared fox. And again, this animal belongs to that Vulpes genus. So this is a true fox. And obviously with those last two I showed you, with that Fennec fox and that bat-eared fox, one thing that really is pronounced in these species, especially these ones over in Africa, are those ears. They're oversized ears. One of the things that is really good and useful for having these oversized ears is if you live in a very, very hot, arid climate, those ears can serve as ways to dissipate or collect heat. Obviously, they're not going to try to collect too much heat, but they can really dissipate a lot of heat. And there are some biological laws and principles that I could go into, but I won't. I don't want to go too technical here. But those ears are very, very effective at keeping that animal cool. The other thing which I thought was remarkable with this particular species is one of the main sources of their diet is insects. And believe it or not, they listen for and they can locate insects because of those ears. And that's part of the reason why they're called bat-eared foxes. So that was a little side tangent that I thought you might find interesting. But we are here not to talk about African foxes. We are here to talk about foxes that we can find in our own backyards, these North American foxes, wherever anyone may live. And so what I plan to do is go over all the species that are found within North America. And just so you know, in this North American continent, we have 4 true foxes. Remember, those are the creatures that belong to that genus Vulpes. We also have a couple of not so true foxes, which I'll get into and explain in a little bit. So with that, let's go over some of the foxes, and this is where I'll quiz you. This will be pretty simple. We're going to start. In fact, I won't even quiz you because everyone will know what this is. This is the most widespread fox in North America. You can see it covers pretty much the entire continent of, or the entire country of Canada and most of the United States. There's a couple of places in the southwestern area that we do not have these, and obviously the coat gives it away. This is the red fox. This is, like I said, one of the most widespread foxes, not just in North America, but worldwide. And obviously you look at the genus there, and it's Vulpes vulpes. So literally translated in Latin, you're talking fox, fox. So this is what everyone considers the epitome of what a fox is. So the next one we have, and this is where I will quiz you. I'm sure everyone will know this, but whoever knows it first, go ahead and type it in. Anyone have an idea what this is? Arctic fox. All right. That one was pretty easy, especially when you see the distribution of the Arctic fox. That scientific name is Vulpes lagopus, and obviously it lives and thrives in those very, very cold climates of the Arctic. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the cool features that it has and that allows it, the adaptations they have that allow it to live where it does. But that's one of the other true foxes in North America. Now we're going to get into a little bit more obscure foxes that not everyone may know. So let's jump to this one. Can anyone guess what kind of fox this is? Desert fox, swift fox. All right, Melissa, I'm gonna forbid you from answering because you're too smart. This is what we call a swift fox, and if you look at the range, sorry, it's not the best picture of the map there, but if you could identify those states, that southernmost, that's actually right where the pointer is. I don't know if you can see the pointer, but that's where I live. That's New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and then a number of you have Oklahoma, parts of Texas. So it is a plains type of animal. It's actually a western plains type of animal. And that is the current geographic range of this species. Like Melissa said, it's the swift fox, and its genus and species is Vulpes velox. Now, the next fox I'm going to show you, you can see that its range is pretty darn close to that one. This fox here, can anyone take a guess? And there is actually a little bit of overlap in the range, and it leads to a really interesting discussion. I don't know what happened there. This fox, believe it or not, is one of the smallest in North America. Oh, okay, I get it. Okay, this fox is called a kit fox. And again, if you look at that geographic range, it's in the southwest area. There's a little bit of overlap from the swift fox. And this one, the genus and species of the kit fox is Vulpes macrotus, or macrotus, however you want to pronounce it. Here's where this drives me nuts, because biologists can't decide on something, and to be honest with you, it's not that they can't decide. Sometimes things are a little gray. Because I was telling you what differentiates one species from another species. There's actually discussion, and it's inconclusive whether or not the swift fox and the kit fox are two distinct species. Some people contend that they're the same species, and they've done genetic testing, and believe it or not, some of the studies say yes, they are different. Some of them say no, they're not. So for now, the vast majority of the thinking is that it is a distinct species from the swift fox. And just so you know, let me go back. When they were talking about the kit, or the two different foxes, they sometimes use the subspecies, and so the swift fox is called Vulpes velox, and then the kit fox is called Vulpes velox macrotus. And so I'm not going to confuse you. I hate that concept of subspecies because I think it's just too confusing, and I probably never should have even mentioned that. Anyway, there is two more species. So those are all the true foxes. As you saw, each one of those, from the red fox to the Arctic fox to the swift fox to the kit fox, they all are in this genus Vulpes. They are true foxes. We do have a couple other species which you call them a fox, we call them a fox, everyone calls them a fox, but they're not in this particular genus. The first one is this guy. He's very widespread, found throughout almost all of the United States, the lower 48, except some of those northwestern states. But many people have seen this. This is what we call a gray fox. And the first thing you'll notice when you're looking at the genus and species here, we no longer have Vulpes. This is Urocyon Scenario argenteus. And so that Urocyon is a completely different genus. And the reason it's not a true fox is they they have some characteristics of other species that really pulls them out of that Vulpes genus. And so this is a very widespread fox, especially if you live in the southeast or the southern part of the United States. The likelihood of seeing a gray fox and a red fox are pretty much the same because they're both very widespread quote unquote foxes. And last but not least, I don't want to mention it, but I'm going to because if you research it, you will find it. There's one other species that is found on these little tiny islands. If you could see or recognize that that map there, that's off the coast of California. Those are the Channel Islands. And so we have this species called a Channel Island fox. And you see it is in the same genus as that gray fox. It's Urocyon littoralis. And crazy enough, because biologists love confusing people, each one of those islands, I'm not going to go there, but each one of those islands is a different subspecies. But for the most part, all we really care about is individual species. So those 6 are the primary species of fox or fox-like creatures in North America. You got the red, you got the gray, you've got the Arctic fox, and then you have the swift fox and the kit fox in the southwest, and then this Channel Island fox off the coast of California. So those are the primary distinct fox species we have. So let's begin to talk. Any questions about different fox species? Now I will tell you, when you begin researching this, because of the fact that people love getting into the weeds and into more details, if, for example, if you look up red fox, there's at least 45 different subspecies of red fox. And if you recall my other webinars that talk about this speciation, you'll know that generally subspecies just applies to what geographic area or what geographic region do they come from. So you can take a red fox from Russia, because they have them there, and a red fox from North America, and they're the same species. They're the same animals. They might be different subspecies, but they can still mate, reproduce, produce viable offspring. So, any questions about the species of fox? Okay, Lori has a good comment. She said, I thought a kit was a baby fox. It is. They can be called a couple of different things. They can be called pups, they can be called cubs, and they can be called kits. And it's funny because a lot of the stuff you'll read, they'll mention the kit fox, and they said not to be confused with the young fox. And so it's one of those words that means both things. Kit fox is a specific species of fox, but kits are also young foxes. Yeah, Kelly, I would guess, knowing where you're at, not that I know exactly where you're at, but I believe you're over in California. I would hazard a guess that one of the most likeliest foxes that you'll be seeing over there would be a kit fox, especially if it's really, really small. They're definitely they're the smallest fox we have here. So if you're seeing a really small fox with that grayish coloration, I can almost guarantee that you're seeing a kit fox. Okay, Don C asked if there's other characteristics that are different other than their looks. It's a good question. Nothing that is now. The characteristics I gave you were pretty much for all those true foxes. And so those skull or those cranial differences hold true throughout those true foxes. Now, when you get into the individual species of those true foxes, there's different characteristics that differentiate one from another. But the characteristics I gave you pretty much define what goes into that Vulpes genus. But we're going to talk more about some of the differences between these species, and hopefully I'll be able to clarify some of your questions there. All right, I'll wait for Lori to type something, and then we'll get going. Oh, Lori, I'm sorry. I just see your question now. You said, are any of them endangered? It doesn't look like there would be too many of those Channel Island pseudofoxes. Yeah, those, believe it or not, are extremely endangered. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think a couple of them were extirpated off those islands, but they were restored. There's a couple of really big threats when it comes to those. Believe it or not, like eagles and some of these large birds of prey, because some of these fox species are so small, they're taken by large birds of prey. But there's also other threats, especially when you're dealing with an island species. As soon as humans begin populating those island species, they introduce other species that compete with the native species. And those Channel Island foxes are definitely on that threatened list. I don't know if they're threatened or endangered. I was just reading about it the other day, but very good question. And I'll see if I can clarify that more later. Okay. Lori, okay, last one. Lori asked, what would a biologist call the non-true foxes instead of a fox? We still call them a fox, but it's just one of those technical, nerdy, geeky things that we tend to do with our spare time. We argue over some of the stupidest things, and so myself included. And so whether or not it's a gray fox or a red fox, I always just consider them all foxes. But if you're looking at the true technical meaning of the term, most of those true foxes generally have that genus Vulpes. And so it's, from a public standpoint, you don't need to know the difference whether or not it's a true fox or not. Those 6 species I mentioned, if you talk about the fox in your backyard and you're talking about any one of those 6 species, you're spot on, correct, and nobody's going to argue with you. Okay, so let's move on to some cool fox facts, if we can. I got to make sure I don't say anything bad there. All right, since we have those 6 species of fox here in North America, let's look at some of the body characteristics. What differentiates one from another? And so what I'm doing, just so you know, I just mentioned 6, but I only have 5 up here. Because that Channel Island fox is just so isolated and just relegated to those specific islands off the California coast, we're not going to talk about them. And so these are the 5 species that are predominantly throughout North America. Not widespread all over, but these are the 5 big ones in North America. We have red, gray, Arctic, swift, and kit. So how do we differentiate between one or another? Obviously, the first 2 are going to be pretty easy because red fox, predominantly their fur color is going to be red. Now, I will tell you, there is a lot of variation. There's a lot of characteristics that can be bred into it. Many people know that you can select certain traits through specific breeding, and unfortunately, a lot of people breed foxes, and so there's different color characteristics and color phases. And so you can get some variation. And so what I'm talking about here is primarily their predominant color, what most of those animals are. So obviously red foxes will have this red fur color. Same thing with gray. Now you did see in the picture that there was also quite a bit of red in that gray fox, but the majority of the body, the back and the sides, will have that gray coloration extending through the tail. But sometimes you do get some of that red spotting on a gray fox. But for the most part, that gray fox is predominantly gray. This is where it gets cool. You get to that Arctic fox. You saw the picture, and most people recognize an Arctic fox because of that white coat. It does not always have that white coat. In the summertime, for a number of months, if they're living in a tundra area where some of the snow could recede, their coat actually turns to either a brown or a grayish coat. They generally only have that white coat during the harshest times of the winter because obviously that helps them with their camouflage. And so they are bicolored for the most part. The swift fox is pretty distinctive. It's one of the brightest oranges that you see. I know a red fox could have some of that orange coloration, but looking at the picture, the swift fox definitely has that orange, sometimes tannish look to it. And then last but not least, we have the kit fox, which again remember the kit fox and the gray fox, or I'm sorry, the kit fox and the gray fox both have this grayish coloration to their fur. So those are some of the ways you can help identify it. Now, remember, coloration can vary. So let's look how big these animals are, because sometimes these extra cues will really help you identify it. Now, the weight that I'm going to present to you is in pounds, and it's the whole variation. I will tell you some of these are wide variations. For example, a red fox, they can be as small as 5 pounds, as big as 25 pounds. 25 pounds is almost unheard of. For the most part, you're talking about a red fox that will weigh anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds. That's typically on average. Gray fox, a little bit smaller than those red foxes. Red foxes are really tall creatures. The gray fox is, like I said, generally smaller, so you're looking 10 to 14 pounds typical for that gray fox. The Arctic fox, they can have quite a range variation. For the most part, they are smaller. They're usually only between like 10 and 15 pounds, but they can get up to 20 pounds. This is where they start getting small. That swift fox, 5 to 7 pounds. That's a tiny, tiny creature. Not super tiny, but it's a lot smaller than what people generally think of some type of canine animal. And last but not least, you have the kit fox, which is the smallest fox species we have in North America. Usually only 3 to 6 pounds. So you have a 4 or 5 pound animal. You're talking a pretty small creature there. Now, how tall are they? Obviously, this coincides or correlates very well with the weight. So red foxes are about the tallest. Now we're looking at the shoulder height. So generally 1.5 feet to almost 2 feet tall at the shoulder. So very, very decent size canid. But you have to know that they're generally a little bit smaller than coyotes. Obviously, a lot smaller than wolves. But the red fox is the tallest of all the foxes. You look at the gray fox. I don't know if you recall that picture. I'll show you another picture of a gray fox, but they seem to have like shorter legs. They could be as long as a red fox, but they seem to have shorter legs, so they're a little bit smaller from a shoulder standpoint. So you're looking about 1 foot to 1.5 feet. Arctic fox, even smaller than that, usually only about 1 foot tall. So these are not as big as a lot of people think these creatures are. And then obviously the swift fox and the kit fox, you're looking, again, really small animals. So knowing what you know as far as their coloration and their size, armed with that information, if you get a good understanding of what these characteristics are, you should be able to identify most of those foxes if you were to see it. The biggest thing, remember, is knowing the geographic range of these foxes and knowing what could possibly be in that area. So, what do foxes eat? One of my favorite creatures, bears, are very much like foxes. So these foxes are omnivores. It literally means they will eat anything from meat to vegetable matter. And so when you look at a fox, what kind of, we know it's an omnivore that'll eat anything, but what kind of creatures is it eating? And generally it's pretty easy. Knowing the size of these animals and pretty much that they're probably smaller than most people think, their diet's going to consist of really small animals that they're eating, especially if they're catching and consuming other animals. And so mice are a huge part of their diet. Same thing with voles, or for example, lemmings up in the Arctic area. Huge part of the diet of an Arctic fox. Then you can get some of the bigger small mammals, like chipmunks, squirrels, obviously, and it can go all the way up to rabbits. There has actually been documented cases where foxes, especially red foxes, are able to take small, freshly born new baby deer. It's not common, doesn't happen all too often, because when you think about it, that deer is about the same size as that fox oftentimes. So for the most part, when a fox is eating meat, these are the mammals it is eating. and obviously all creatures in between those sizes. But here's the thing. They do eat and consume quite a bit of meat. It's not always warm-blooded animals that they're eating. And so foxes can also be, the term for it is insectivore, but insectivore is solely eating insects. But foxes will eat crickets. They're going to eat locusts or grasshoppers. They'll love eating beetles. So they have a good part of their diet which consists of insects. Another big thing that they will eat, especially in these areas that have plenty of water, is they're known to go into these streams and find and locate crayfish or crawfish, depending on what part of the country you're in. And so this right here pretty much sums up all the meat, all the protein that fox is obtaining is usually through creatures just like this. Now, because they are omnivores, believe it or not, they will also supplement their diet with things like mast, soft mast, like berries, blackberries, strawberries, blueberries, any type of berries that are blooming, and obviously acorns. So acorns, as most people know, is what we classify as hard mast. Again, that's that technical term. But they'll eat berries, they'll eat acorns. They tend not to eat grasses. Usually animals that eat grasses have specially designed stomachs to be able to digest that. But for the most part, what you see on the screen here is the smorgasbord for what foxes eat. And so, moving on, behavior. Behavior is pretty simple when it comes to foxes. I can't see a raise of hand, and I'm not going to ask the question, but most people don't see foxes. I could probably count on two hands the number of times I've seen a fox out in the wild. Reason being, they are extremely shy and elusive. They don't like being seen. For the most part, they are nocturnal. You're not going to see them during the daytime. Now, I will tell you, a lot of people think that if you see a fox during the daytime, that means the fox is sick. Does not mean that at all. It could be, but that does not mean if a fox is out in the daytime that it's sick. The reason being, they can be quite inquisitive. Now, a red fox, for some reason or another, is much, much bolder than all those other species, than the Arctic, the kit, the swift. Red foxes sometimes become very, very bold in that they want to find out what's going on. So sometimes they will come into people's yards, even when people are there, because something has captured that fox's attention, whether or not it's a pet, not that the fox is going to eat it, but it's just something that distracts the fox, and the fox just is extremely inquisitive, and sometimes they do things that seem out of the ordinary. Does not mean that they're sick or rabid or anything like that, but definitely don't approach a fox, especially a wild fox. And now we get to the part that I love, because I've worked in the world of wildlife for a long, long time, and especially in the job that I used to have people tell me all the time of hearing these animals in the night that would scream or make these other extremely strange noises. And believe it or not, even though they were not present, they were often attributed to black panthers or cougars or some of these other large, scary creatures. And for the most part, in almost every situation, I won't say in every situation, but in many situations, not every, but in many situations, what people are hearing is vocalizations from a fox. They can scream, and it literally packs a punch. Now, I will tell you, they have multiple vocalizations, and I'm going to play some for you, so don't mind me as I get this ready for you. But what I want you to do is kind of sit back, relax, and you don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to, but just imagine being on your back deck, middle of the night, hearing some of these vocalizations. It could really cause people, especially if you don't know what is making that sound. No one would ever imagine it's this small, somewhat frail, elusive creature making such a large, really uncharacteristic noise for its size. So, all right, let me play a couple of these vocalizations and you'll get an understanding of why people never suspect a fox. That particular one, and hopefully we'll hear it again. Oftentimes it's described as a woman screaming in the distance. That last one, that chattering, was actually sometimes when they fight or play fight, they'll make that high-pitched chattering. But we'll go back to some more of the screams that you could hear that are attributed to foxes. All right, that's enough of the fox screams. So they got a varieties. The crazy thing, and I strongly encourage you to Google them and look up some of these fox calls. Man, Thursday night football. Look up some of these vocalizations that foxes do. Make sure that a video accompanies the sound. Because when you see the fox making them, that assures you that the identification is correct. Because Melissa even said a couple of them sounded like a bird. The first time I heard that, I definitely thought it was a bird, but those other ones are absolutely, without a doubt, the screams of a fox, because they show a video of the fox making that. And I will tell you, like I said, when you're sitting out on the back porch and you hear this scream, now, it could be extremely loud, especially if you're in an area where things echo. And the first thought out of someone's mind is not a little dainty fox. Again, they attribute it to a woman screaming, but you don't know how many people think that is a mountain lion or some other large type of cat-like creature that is making those noises. And it's just a little bitty old fox. So, those vocalizations are pretty awesome. Look them up. All right, now we're going to get into some crazy cool. We're going to talk about some things that I mentioned a couple of cool things about those African foxes, but now we're going to stick with North American foxes. Oh, before we move on, I just saw a couple of people typed some things. Chanda said, what are they conveying when they scream? A lot of those screams was the vixen. I didn't mention this, but the female foxes are called vixens. A lot of times the males are called dogs, but a lot of times it's when the males and the females are communicating to each other, whether or not it's mating season. Sometimes they're just calling to each other for one reason or another. It's kind of like a location call. And so that's why it's really loud, and that's why it can be really kind of scary when this animal just belts out these screams. But oftentimes they're locator calls for various reasons, mating season or to locate if one of the offspring gets lost, they can do one of those calls. So, crazy cool stuff. All right, let's start. Red fox. I mentioned that they are the most widespread fox in North America. They are the most widespread fox in the world. In fact, even in the family carnivora, carnivores, they have the widest geographic range of any of the carnivores. This goes beyond brown bears and everything else. So red fox are literally found all over the place. I tell you what, you really want to spend an evening pulling your hair out, look at the 45 different subspecies of red fox, because they're found on almost every continent, but it's just crazy, their distribution. And it's pretty interesting. They all have the red fox look to them, but some of the pelages or the fur coloration is really unique. They're beautiful, beautiful animals, literally found all over the world. And so red fox are everywhere, which I thought was crazy cool. Okay, this is when it gets super crazy cool. In fact, I believe Trish kind of mentioned about how some foxes kind of reminded her closer, more like a cat than anything else. Believe it or not, gray foxes. Again, gray foxes are throughout most of North America, or most of the United States, especially the southern part of the United States. But they actually have claws that are somewhat retractable, and they can use those claws to climb trees. They're one of the only fox species that routinely climbs trees. And so they hunt quite a bit from there, but a lot of times they'll go up into the trees to elude predators that may be chasing them. So this is one of those instances where it acts more like a different species. This could also be, and I don't know whether or not this is true, but remember, red fox is a different genus than the true foxes because it exhibits a lot of this cat-like type of behaviors and physical characteristics. So thought that was crazy cool. Arctic foxes. Absolutely beautiful, gorgeous creature. Their fur is beyond any other fur in the mammal world. Supposedly, it has the greatest amount of insulation. Now, keep in mind, we're just talking the fur. You hear about some of the insulation, like on seals and walruses. Understand, a lot of that is blubber and fat. But when it comes to fur, keeping an animal warm, the Arctic fox has the highest insulation factor when it comes to the actual fur. What was crazy cool about this is there's been some studies that been conducted that says they don't even get cold. They don't start to shiver. That's the sign of the animal getting cold until it's negative 94 degrees Fahrenheit, or it's minus 70 Celsius, which is crazy cold. Things far short of those extreme cold temperatures start freezing and falling off. And so it's crazy that these animals can survive some of these cold temperatures, and it all has to do with their fur. Another really cool thing with their fur is these Arctic foxes are one of the only creatures that literally have fur on the bottom of their feet. And so if you look at, in most other mammals or animals, you look at their pad or their toes or whatever, and it's kind of barren of all fur. It's a soft tissue usually. Arctic foxes, though, because of the harsh climates that they're in, generally have fur all over the feet, even the bottom of their pad. Another thing that I thought was really interesting about these Arctic foxes, one of the main sources of food for an Arctic fox is the lemming. And so therefore it's sometimes called the Lemming Fox. What's interesting with lemmings, if you know anything about them, their population is very cyclical. There's a boom where there's lemmings coming out your ears, and then there's a bust where the population crashes. And so because of that, these Arctic fox populations sometimes boom and bust. And so when there's a lot of food, they are very, very robust and healthy population-wise, so much so that they give birth to an incredible number of kits or pups. It was even documented where an Arctic fox gave birth to a litter of 18 little baby kits, not to be confused with kit foxes. And so it's amazing how these Arctic foxes kind of follow their main food, one of their main food sources. And so when the going's good, things are going great for Arctic foxes. And when that food source crashes, then they reduce the amount of babies they're having because there's not enough food resources available. So I thought that was, again, crazy cool regarding the foxes, the Arctic fox. All right, here is, this is a great thing. Going back to, I think Dawn asked a question about other distinguishing characteristics. This is one that is fairly well known. I don't know if it's the only instance, but fox pupils, especially in the Vulpes genus, they have narrow slits as pupils, and they're vertical slits. There are some species that have horizontal slits, but if you look at this picture, which I think is gorgeous, you could see the vertical slits of their pupils. This is a picture of a red fox, and so that genus Vulpes is definitely known for having pupils that are more in the shape of vertical slits. Some more cool nomenclature. I should have quizzed you before I popped it up, but it's interesting. I love looking to see what groups of animals are called. And so a family of foxes or a group of foxes is called a skulk or a leash. The reason I put family of foxes is because they're solitary animals. You're not going to have a community of foxes that are all unrelated living together. They're pretty much solitary animals. So whenever you do have a group of foxes, it's generally from the same family. Like I said, they could have litters that sometimes get large. Even red foxes could have litters of 8 to 10 pups or kits. And whenever you see that group together, it's often called a skulk or a leash. And so I believe, last but not least, I'm going to quiz you and say, what does a fox and a compass have in common? This is where I'm going to wait for someone to answer, because I think this is one of the coolest things, and I knew this before I started preparing this topic. All right, you're both onto it, both Dawn and Chanda. What is really, really interesting is that if you've ever seen, and again, I strongly encourage you to Google this, and put it this way, if anyone can't find this, let me know, and I could probably get a video and send it to you. But if you've ever seen a fox, when they're hunting for a mouse or a vole or something that's underneath the snow, oftentimes, in fact, I posted on Facebook today, you saw a picture of one of the videos. Oftentimes you'll see the fox sit there and tilt his head back and forth, and what he's doing, he's listening, and he's trying to focus in where that mouse or vole or whatever animal is underneath the snow. They can detect the movement of that animal underneath the snow. And a researcher, I believe he was in Scandinavia, studied foxes his whole life, and he recorded and videoed numerous attempts of the fox trying to pounce on its prey. Now, you really have to look it up, because National Geographic has a couple of amazing clips that show the fox leaping high up in the air and literally torpedoing down into the snow face first to literally capture that animal that's underneath the snow. Well, this researcher in Scandinavia was taking all sorts of interesting measurements, and what he found out was that the fox was significantly more successful whenever he was facing or oriented to true north. And so I don't know how it works. Don't ask me. I'm not as smart as I pretend to be. But they use the magnetic fields to help them hone in. How they do that, again, that's beyond me. But it has been documented that whenever the fox is oriented to true north, they are much more successful in their leap trying to secure prey. And so you could read up on that, and if someone can decipher exactly how that works, because nature is absolutely amazing, and there's so many things that occur in nature that I can't explain. I've found that to be one of the most fascinating things is that foxes are more successful in their attempt at securing prey when they make that leap when they're oriented to true north. So with that, what I'm going to do, I am going to tell you, last but not least, I do want to thank everyone for not bringing this up because this drives me nuts. That whole what does the fox say? So I'm not even going to stay on this slide because I don't want anyone to ask me that. But I am going to end here, and I'm going to sit around and we're going to talk and take questions. Everyone knows where to find information on the Wildlife for You webinars. Everyone here is very familiar with that, as well as our Facebook page. I will tell you we do have some classes coming up that might be of interest to you. So again, October 4th, we're doing super sleepers. This one is about black bears. We do have a super sleepers with brown bears, or quote unquote grizzly bears. That's coming up later, but this one October 4th is going to be on black bear hibernation. Stephanie is going to cover for me if I cannot make it because I'll be at a conference, but that is happening 7 p.m. October 4th. The next one after that, Robert Brewer's back to, it's kind of like a part 2 to his success stories, and this one is going to be called Foundations of Wildlife Conservation. How do we manage? We know of success stories. Robert talked about success stories with wildlife. This one is going to be more of how do we manage for wildlife. So it's that Foundations of Wildlife Conservation. That's Thursday, October 18th. Then this is one, I can't wait to begin promoting this because this is one of my favorites. Kim DeLogier's back. He's going to be doing another version of Bear Tales. Kim and I have done a couple of these seminars. It's been almost a year since we've done the last one. But what the Bear Tales webinar is, if you have not participated, it's not a lecture. It's not a teaching moment. This is pure entertainment. Kim is so chock full of amazing stories. Obviously, he's led a crazy, amazing life, far beyond anything I've had. But he's also a best-selling co-author. Bear in the Backseat, it's Tales of a Park Ranger. And so what Kim does on this webinar is he comes in and he talks to you one-on-one, telling these stories. You can ask him questions. You can take the conversation wherever you want it to go. So it's a fantastic thing, Tuesday, October 23rd. And I think that's all I have for that. Obviously, everyone knows of these webinars, and I can't thank you enough for being an amazing group of people that follow along, and I appreciate you so very much. So with that, I'm going to thank you once again, and if you have any questions about foxes, I'll be here until we're all done and all petered out. So let me first back up to see if I missed anything. Give me a moment to catch my breath. Okay, Dawn asked, she's been told foxes are related to dogs more so than cats. Is that true? Yes, absolutely, Dawn. In fact, when you look at the whole grand scheme of things, there's a family of animals called canids, C-A-N-I-D-S, or it's easier to understand canine, which is a dog. And so that family of dogs is called canids. And believe it or not, foxes are in that family. So they're much closer to dogs than, say, for example, felids. Now, having said that, that red fox and climbing trees, it's not so much biologically that they're related to cats, but behaviorally they do some things that cats do. But by and large, for the most part, foxes are much closer to dogs than they are of any other families. Or they're in the dog family, as a matter of fact. Yes, I'm just looking. I love it that you guys, I will tell you without a doubt, you are above and beyond what the average Joe Q or Joan Q public know about wildlife. Um, the fact that many of you knew that north-facing aspect is pretty impressive because that's something hardly anybody ever knows. Okay, Chanda asked, I know they have a high incidence of sarcoptic mange. Do they ever recover or do they suffer with it until death? The good thing with mange, and I know this particularly because black bears are susceptible to mange, mange is mostly bothersome. It's caused by a mite that causes irritation in the skin. The hair falls out. And for the most part, if it's just a mild case of mange, it's just bothersome to that animal. Now, I will tell you, when you are dealing with severe cases where the majority of hair falls out, absolutely, it can become a life and death situation. I will tell you, there was a picture recently of a black bear that had the worst case of mange. It was completely naked, and the Virginia Wildlife Rehab Center took care of that bear, and just in a matter of months, it had the most beautiful fur coat you could ever imagine. So the good thing with that is mange can go away. It can disappear. Obviously, it disappears quicker when it's being treated, but these are wild animals. They're not going to get treatment, and so hopefully, if it's just a mild case, they recover. Like I said, it's more of an irritation when it's just patches here and there. But if it does affect most of their fur, then obviously, yes, it can become life-threatening. The reason I'm pausing is I'm reading Kelly's comment. Kelly, don't feel bad about not seeing foxes. The, this is one of the wonderful things about wildlife is they are all around us, and we never know it. And it's probably best that we don't have these interactions because you know how foolish humans are, and sometimes, most of the time, we do things that we shouldn't be doing. And so the fact that these foxes live amongst us, and I can almost guarantee every one of us on this talk have foxes that have come through their backyard or come close to you're coming through your backyard unless you're in a downtown city area. Um, I think it's amazing that they're out there. So the fact that you don't see them, don't feel bad. Having said that, especially if you live in a somewhat rural area, even if you live in a subdivision, if you've got a yard that is accessible to wildlife, what I would strongly, strongly recommend, because it's relatively cheap and it's so rewarding, is getting yourself a trail camera. Those are the cameras that are motion activated that will take pictures at night, whether or not it's flash or infrared. But you could set it up in your backyard to capture whatever animals are moving through. Now, I will tell you, some people will bait them to attract animals in front of the camera. I don't necessarily recommend that, but I tell you what is really interesting. Say, for example, there is, I don't know how squeamish everyone is, but if there was a roadkill, say an armadillo or any other creature, a rabbit or something, got hit by your house in your neighborhood, if you can stomach it and place that in your yard and put the camera over it, it is so fascinating to see the other creatures that make use of that carcass. And that's what I love about nature. Nothing goes to waste. And so it really tells a lot. It informs you what creatures are moving through your backyard as you're sleeping through the night. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah, Chanda, it's pretty interesting that you work for that veterinary dermatologist. It's one of those diseases that really captures people's attention because it, it makes the animal look like nothing it's supposed to. When you see an animal that is supposed to have fur all over it, and you have large patches of fur missing, or in the extreme cases, most of the fur missing, those creatures are almost unidentifiable, and it's a intimidating, scary thing when you see some of those animals. That, like I said, the nice thing with mange is it's pretty treatable. When I was at the Bear Center in Tennessee, and this was 20 some years ago, we had a number of bears that had mild cases that were treated, and they came. In fact, a number of them we didn't even treat at the time. We just had the bear at the center isolated, and it took care of itself. Okay, Bet has an awesome question. It says, do coyotes compete with or ignore foxes? Coyotes and foxes don't get along. Well, put it this way, coyotes love foxes because coyotes will kill foxes, coyotes will sometimes eat foxes, but they do not get along. There's a strong sense of competition. And so that is one thing. If you have a really high coyote population in an area, it doesn't mean you're not going to have any foxes, but they definitely keep each other in check. Because understand that fox is a much smaller creature, it's the one that usually gets forced out of an area if coyotes move in. And so that was one of the issues with some of these other foxes becoming endangered, is because the introduction. This is fascinating, actually, because man in his infinite wisdom removed a lot of these larger predators like mountain lions and wolves throughout most of their range. It allowed some of these other creatures to move in. Now, for the most part, cougars and wolves and things like that, there's not many of them. They're an apex predator, so their populations are pretty low. And so there could be a whole lot of foxes in an area where you have mountain lions or even wolves. The thing is, when you remove those mountain lions and wolves, those apex predators, they get replaced by something. And in many times, it's going to be coyotes. Now, coyotes are not that apex predator. They're what we call a mesopredator. They're kind of in the middle. And so there's a lot more of them, higher populations of those predators. Like I said, coyotes don't get along well with foxes. They'll predate on them. They'll kick them out. They'll kill them. They'll eat them. And so now, instead of having one or two cougars to contend with, you've got 50 coyotes to contend with. That's why we upset the balance of nature sometimes. And I always say, man in his infinite wisdom, our wisdom is we always learn that we screw things up quite a bit. So. Kelly, if you need any help, if you do get a camera and you need any help or advice, obviously I wouldn't be there to help you set it up. But as far as where to put it, how to put it, if you do use any type of lure in front of it to see what's in there, let me know. I'd be happy to help you out. The cougar screaming, again, in my line of work, it's amazing how many people they heard that have told me they heard a cougar scream when they're camping or hiking. And the crazy thing is, where they're hearing these cougar screams, we don't have cougars. And so, by and large, like I said, I can't guarantee anything, but I would imagine that many of those screams they hear are probably attributed to some type of fox, whether or not it's a red fox or any other fox. Chanda, that's a good way to see foxes. Most of my fox sightings have definitely been middle of the night headlight type of thing, especially if you depending on where you are, shining lights in fields, you see lots and lots of critters. Bob, that's a great comment, especially when it comes to red foxes. Of all the fox species, red foxes are the most diurnal, meaning have the tendency to hunt during the day. Kit foxes, swift foxes, red foxes, very, very nocturnal. Every once in a while you will catch them in the daylight. Red foxes, however, seem to have the highest propensity to hunt during the day. Now, a lot of that depends on their comfort level. If there's, for example, if there's lots of coyotes around, they may not be as active they don't want to be seen. They don't want to be eaten by other creatures. But if there's not much in that area that's really going to mess with them, they can alter their behavior, and they can do things during the day and not feel threatened at all. Okay, Lori. So foxes aren't pack animals. That is correct. Not like wolves, where wolves form these big family units and create these packs. Foxes, for the most part, are solitary. Obviously, you're going to have some pair bonds with the mates, and then obviously the offspring. But for the most part, they don't socialize with extended family members. Having said that, I was reading quite a bit lately on their mating. It is so variable between species. Red foxes and a couple of the other foxes, they will have their offspring, and literally in a matter of 8 to 9 weeks, I believe for the red fox, in about 2 months, those kits, those young foxes, are weaned and pretty much on their own. So it's really, really quick that they raise their kits and they get them out. Get them out quickly. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's the kit fox, which has a much longer extended family life. I think they stay with their offspring. I think it was closer to 5 to 6 months. And so if you're interested in any particular species of fox, I strongly recommend you looking up and reading about that, because it is highly variable. The number of offspring that they'll have and the duration of time that they spend with their offspring does vary quite a bit. So, okay, Dawn asked a question which I forgot to bring up because I thought it was, I should have added it as one of those crazy cool facts. It says, do all foxes live in burrows, or do they just live anywhere? Yeah, many foxes, especially during the time that they're given birth, they will have some type of den or burrow that is their more or less home base, and they stay there quite a bit to raise their young, and generally they have an area that they come back to all the time instead of just constantly on the move wandering around. The thing that I found crazy fascinating, and I wish I would have added it to the slide, was if you look at Arctic foxes, their dens are usually really, really complex. It's literally like a maze. And they even said some of these dens for Arctic foxes have covered is over 1,000 square meters, which is a pretty substantial area, because understand that they're in the snow quite a bit. And if you're like a kid, you can make tunnels throughout the snow. And so these Arctic foxes have literally a matrix of all these tunnels and denning areas. They have escape routes. In case, for example, a polar bear tries to dig them out, they can get through to other areas and escape. So I thought it was fascinating that instead of having like one solid chamber and that's it, they have a series of tunnels that can comprise quite a large distance or quite a large area under the snow. And so they more or less live in a maze, which I thought was crazy cool. Okay, Don says, I've heard that foxes occasionally eat baby lynx, but I wasn't sure. Now I'm even less sure because it didn't show up while you were talking about fox's food chain. There's a whole mess of animals I did not list. Now I will tell you, if you have an adult fox that finds a baby of anything, it's going to eat it. For example, one of the animals I didn't mention in there, which does make up a fairly substantial part of their diet, especially in the plains, is baby birds, ground nesting birds. When birds are on the nest, whether or not it's waterfowl that's nesting on the ground or something like quail or even turkeys, baby birds can comprise quite a bit of the diet. So there's a lot of food items I didn't mention, but just think of the relative size. So hopefully you can see this. Ball your fist up. Any animal that's about that size can become a prey item for a fox. So when you think of a baby lynx or a baby coyote or a baby anything, even well, I won't say baby bear, but any animal that's that small can potentially become a prey item for the fox. Now, I will tell you, when that baby lynx grows up to be a full-size lynx, bobcats and foxes, they're roughly the same size. Lynx is a little bit bigger than a bobcat. But if I were to hazard a guess, which one would be the dominant one, I would say the lynx would have more potential of preying on a fox than anything else. All right. I believe I got most of the questions. If I missed anything and I go back and find something, I will be sure to contact you. Just wanted to say you guys are awesome. Thank you so very much for participating. Any questions, anything comes up between now and forever, by all means, just shoot me an email, send me a text, do something, get my attention, and say, hey, I need your help. I'll be happy to help. And if I can't answer the question or anything, I'll get someone who can. But you guys are awesome. I so very much appreciate you being here. Remember, we got that Super Sleeper webinar, which is crazy cool about black bear hibernation. Yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want to give it all away, because it's amazing stuff what a black bear does. So if you could join in October 4th, I'm going to try to be there, but if not, we've got Stephanie who will fill in for that. Wonderful presentation that you'll